All right, good evening. We'll call the meeting to order. I'll read this first. So I've got some opening remarks. The public meeting is being heard by the City Council Planning Advisory Committee, and public notice has been given in accordance with the Planning Act. The non-elected members of the Planning Advisory Committee are Mr. John Beltudis, Mr. David Joyce, Ms. Catherine Brown, and Mr. Paul Jennings. Citizen appointees may ask questions and participate in the discussion in order to assist in making recommendations to City Council, but may not make motions or vote in connection with the public meeting. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Planning Committee or City Council before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of City Council or the local planning appeal tribunal. Board. If a person or a public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Belleville before the related bylaw is passed, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the local planning appeal tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party. Comments received at this public meeting, as well as written comments, will be considered by the Planning Advisory Committee members, as well as the Engineering Development Services Department, in analysis of the applications that were part of the public meeting tonight. A recommendation report will be brought forward upon receipt of all agency and public comments at a future meeting, and the Planning Advisory Committee's recommendations will be forwarded to City Council for consideration. Any persons wishing to be advised of the Belleville Planning Advisory Committee's recommendations with respect to today's applications are requested to leave their name and address on the appropriate notification sheet located on the clipboard beside the podium. So as far as attendance, Councillor Kelly sends his regrets. Any disclosure or pecuniary interest? Seeing none, public meeting 3.1, notice of application and introductory public meeting for proposed condominium conversion, 217 Bridge Street East, City of Belleville. Owner is Parkwood Apartments Limited, care of Real Star Management, file number 12 CD-19002. The agent is MHBC Planning Limited. Staff want to introduce the application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The application relates to a property at 217 Bridge Street East. This is an existing 7-story, 68-unit rental apartment building. The owner has applied for approval of a plan of condominium. This would have the effect of converting the existing rental building to a condominium ownership. There are no other physical changes proposed to the site. And as with all of our public meetings, staff will take information from the committee and the public and any circulated agencies and prepare a report for a future meeting.
Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the application? If you just come forward and just activate the microphone.
Good evening. My name is Andrea Sinclair. I'm a planner with MHBC Planning. I'm here on behalf of Real Star in support of the application. I'm really here tonight to hear any comments from the public and to answer any questions that may come about as a result. So I'm happy to come back up to the mic after we've heard any other comments.
Okay. In the meantime, is there any comments from any committee members or questions? Sorry. No, see none. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the application? And a third time, anyone wishing to speak in favor of the application? Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition of the application? And a second time, anyone wanting to speak in opposition of the application? And finally, a third time, anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Seeing none, can I get a motion to refer? Moved by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor Sanderson. All in favor? Motion is carried. 3.2, notice of application and introductory public meeting for proposed condominium conversion 230 and 232 Moira Street East, City of Belleville. Owner is Moira Street Apartments Limited, care of Real Star Management, file number 12 CD-19003. Agent is MHBC Planning Limited. Mr. Beauvais.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As with the previous meeting, this is also an application to convert the existing two 12-unit apartment buildings on the subject property to condominium from a rental situation. Again, there is no new development or modification to the existing buildings on the site. And with the previous application, we will be bringing back a staff report at a future PAC meeting.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the application? I almost know what it's going to sound like.
Same comment as before. If there's any questions, I'm happy to respond to those.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee on this application? No? Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the application? And a third time, anyone wishing to speak in favor of the application? Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition of the application? Second time in opposition of the application? And finally, a third time, anyone wishing to speak in opposition of the application? Seeing none, I need a motion to refer. Councillor Culhane, Councillor Sanderson, all in favor? Motion's carried. Need a motion to adjourn this portion of the meeting. Councillor Sanderson, Councillor Culhane, all in favor? Motion's carried. So,
I have a question, if I may.
sure.
I'm not familiar with your process, and I came today to attend the meeting, not knowing what would happen. It has to do with the property at 217 Bridge, and I think you've referred it on to council now?
No, so if you wanted to speak regarding that application,
I'm not in opposition to it, but
Okay.
I'm not in favor of it either, and I wasn't given a third option. There's no, like I said, I'm not familiar with your process, so I have a couple
Sure.
of questions about it.
okay.
And so my question is, when and how do I table those questions, and how do I get them answered?
Okay, so typically, if you had some questions, you could have come to the podium and asked them. I'll, if it's consensus of the committee, if you want to pose your questions now, you may not get answers for them today, depending on what they are. Staff will take notes.
Okay.
The process is, this is an introductory meeting, it's a public meeting.
Yes.
Input, and then it would be the next Planning Advisory Committee meeting, so in August, the application would actually be deliberated here, and then a recommendation would go to City Council. So it's a two-step process. So
Okay.
if you want to pose your questions, staff can take notes.
Okay, and I just may not be asking in the right location. I'm wondering, I'm a neighbor, I live on Bleecker Street, Bleecker Avenue, and I'm wondering how the existing people, tenants within the building are treated, and how that transition carries over. And if this question, my questions on that are not appropriate to this meeting, where do I ask those questions?
Mr. Bowley?
Through the chair, my understanding is that the owner of the property has no intention of selling any of the units. The life will continue on as it always has at that building. It's been there a long time. They will continue to pay rent to Real Star, and there will be no change to that at this time.
Okay, so at some point in the time, when there is a change, then how are people notified of it? And
Well, there wouldn't be any notification provided. As a condominium, Real Star at any point in time would have the option of selling the units if they chose to do that. But there are protections under the Landlord-Tenant Act or the Residential Tenancy Act, I guess it's called now, that give existing tenants the right of first refusal to purchase the unit or to continue to reside in the unit if they choose to.
okay, all right, thank you. Those were my
Okay.
questions.
Okay, very good. So we're actually at the Planning Advisory Committee meeting, and in terms of attendance, again, Councillor Kelly sends his regrets. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing none, can I get confirmation of the minutes of the City Council Planning Committee meeting and Planning Advisory Committee meeting held on June 3rd, 2019? Mr. Baltutis, Mr. Joyce, all in favor? Motion's carried. Deputations, none, Mr. Clerk. Correspondence, 5.1, June 24th, 2019 emails from residents of 217 Bridge Street East. There's a resolution that the June 24, 2019 emails from Bill and Helen Woolgar and Dave Crockett, residents of 217 Bridge Street East, supporting application number 12 CD-19002 for proposed condominium conversion be received and referred to referrals from public meeting item 6.1. Councillor Culhane, Mr. Joyce, all in favor? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
One more to add to that, probably the Bill and Bev Spence.
And yeah, I had a note for that. Is that for the 217?
Yes.
Okay, so then we'll amend them. Yep. I had a note here on that, so.
I'll approve the amendment.
Okay, so, okay. And Councillor Culhane, you're good? Friendly amendment? Okay? Yes, absolutely. All in favor? That motion's carried. So 6.1, referrals from public meeting. Notice of application and introductory public meeting for proposed condominium conversion 217 Bridge Street East, City of Belleville, owner Parkwood Apartments Limited, care of Real Star Management, file number 12 CD-19002. Agent is MHBC Planning Limited. Manager of Approvals, report number APS-2019-22. Correspondence items 5.1 refers. The resolution is that report number APS 2019-22 regarding the notice of application and introductory public meeting for proposed condominium conversion at 217 Bridge Street East, City of Belleville be received as information, and that staff report back at such time as input from the public, commenting agencies and municipal departments has been received, assessed, and addressed to the satisfaction of the Engineering and Development Services Department. Moved by Ms. Brown, seconded by Councillor Culhane. Any questions or comments? Councillor Culhane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Bove. Mr. Bove, is it possible to have the points listed in Mrs. Spence's letter addressed in the report back to us?
Yeah, that's no problem at all. We typically now create a table in our reports that lists all public input that we've received, all the issues that have been raised, and we provide staff comment on those comments and questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Baltutis.
This is the second time this has come through our committee. What's the difference between the last time and this time?
Through the chair, the last time, and those that are not on the, or were previously not on the committee will maybe not realize, there was a request, I'm guessing a year ago, for an exemption from condominium review. So the applicant, same owner, was requesting that the conversion be allowed to go through without having to go through the full condominium application. And so council at that time chose to deny those, that request for condominium, and actually same answer to both properties that we talked about tonight. And so the owner went back and decided to submit the full application to try and go through the process that way.
Okay. Sorry. I'll recognize Councillor Sandison.
Excuse me, thank you. Really just a few comments if I can. So in the staff report that comes back, I think we need to give recognition to a few things. Number one, the vacancy rate from Stats Canada for Belleville was 2.4%. Up slightly from 2017, but still troublesome. We've got a housing crisis, so that's no secret. But in September of last year, one of the headlines that came out through the Hastings Housing Resource Center was that lack of rental units are a crisis. And so as we consider changing this model, I think we need to think about the vacancy rate, B, the rental crisis, and in Section 2 of the Planning Act, it It guides council, but I would argue that it also guides the Planning Advisory Committee, that we need to have an adequate provision for a full range of housing. So that would include rental. And the other thing it talks about is the protection of the financial and economic well-being of the municipality. So we need to consider that as well. And so those are my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Joyce?
That's what I was going to respond. Further to Mr. Baltuta's comment, remind me when we changed from doing the exemption, because I've been on the committee for a while, and I know at one time we did allow the exemption to happen. Was there a change in policy, or did we just get stricter in terms of this process? I'm just trying to educate myself on that.
Yeah, I'll refer that to Mr. Bove.
What's that?
Well, I think it was the opinion of council at the time that they, for some of the reasons that Councillor Sanderson just raised, they weren't in support of it. So because it was just a request for exemption, they simply denied the request for exemption, which of course left the option of the applicant making the full condominium application, and they've taken advantage of that to file the applications that are before us tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Got a resolution on the floor. All in favor? Motion is carried. 6.2, notice of application and introductory public meeting for a proposed condominium conversion, 232 Moira Street East, City of Belleville. Owner is Moira Street Apartments Limited, care of Real Star Management. File number 12CD-19003. Agent is MHBC Planning Limited. Manager of Approvals, report number APS 2019-23. Resolution reads that report number APS-2019-23 dated July 2nd, 2019 regarding notice of application and introductory public meeting for a proposed condominium conversion 230 to 232 Moira Street East, City of Belleville be received as information, and that staff report back at such time as input from the public, commenting agencies and municipal departments has been received, assessed, and addressed to the satisfaction of the Engineering Development Services Department. Moved by Councillor Sanderson, seconded by Mr. Joyce. Any questions or comments? Councillor Culhane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask the lady that's representing Real Star a question, if she could come back to the mic.
Sure. Is the committee good with that? Yep. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Could you tell me, please, the people who live at 232 Moira Street East, there's been no communication from them? Have you had a meeting with them?
So Real Star met with tenants of both buildings back last year when they went through the exemption route. There hasn't been any further consultation since that point. What we wanted to do was hear any of the comments that came forward today, because we knew a decision was not being made tonight. And then Real Star is, even though it's not required under the Planning Act, is happy to provide further correspondence explaining the applications, because we do recognize there may be some new tenants who were not living in the building last year when this went through the process that may not understand what the conversion could mean and those details. So we believe there's time between this meeting and when a decision's made that additional correspondence can be done through Real Star to existing tenants in both at Bridge Street and Moira.
So that, if I may, that process, individual notification by mail, that'll be followed?
Either by mail, or we could post at the building and they may hold an actual meeting.
Okay, if posting in the building doesn't seem to be very effective, from what I understand, unless each individual tenant is notified, or at least a notice is put on each door, which would be certainly cheaper than mailing, but from what's gone forward from Bridge Street East, I think it would be greatly appreciated if communication continued with the tenants and your plans were made known to them.
And Real
Before
Star
the
is
next meeting.
definitely willing to do that, so we'll
Thank you
make
very
sure that we
much.
do that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. If I can ask another question again, I'm sorry, should have kept you up there.
I'm here, it might as well be useful.
Well, thank you very much. And I really like how you've listed affordability and talking about affordability as a whole. I think this potential project has 23 affordable units, 21 at $50 and 23 at $100 rent reduction for Rockwood units, which is great. But what another stat I'd like to have coming back is when you're talking to those tenants, just getting an idea of how, and I know it's hard to predict sometimes where you're going to be, but how long these tenants plan at this point in their life being affordable to stay in those units. And the reason I'm looking for that is we're trying to get a feel when it comes to affordability, not just on the number of units, but how long. And what my only concern would be is if it is, and I understand there's a grandfather that if people have had units and if they want to continue to pay, they're going to pay, but if they want to leave, that unit would be sold into a condo. I'm just concerned that we'd start losing units of affordability rather than keeping those. And knowing in some point of how many of those tenants intend to stay is going to make that a little better of an argument, because the other side of that would be that if some tenants, let's say 50% are planning to leave within 5 years, and we're seeing that cycle through, well, that number is going to change for the 5, 10, 20-year outlook in terms of that affordability. And as Councillor Sanderson has already stated, we're in a crisis, we know that. In short term, I really like to see what we're seeing for numbers, but long term, are we going to see all of those units displaced into condominiums? Are we going to see 50% of those? I think having a little bit better of an opinion, as Councillor Culhane has asked, from those tenants is going to be a little easier for me to see that.
So we can see if we can get that information. People may not be willing to say how long they plan to stay, but with RealStar's model, they've done about between 15 to 20 conversions. They haven't sold a single unit in any of those conversions. It's not their model. They are a rental housing corporation. They have no intention of selling any of these units at any point. The original rental building they bought in the 1970s is still a rental building to this day. The reason they've, and you might have noticed in the information that they've have agreed to do a 10-year sort of moratorium on sale, is really to give existing tenants that additional comfort, because as much as we can say they have no intent of selling, people still have that concern. So that's something that, as they've been working through these conversions in other municipalities, they've started just agreeing to right off the cut that there will be no sale within 10 years. But beyond that, that's not the intent. On the affordable piece, so there's, with the provincial policy statement, there's two parts to the affordable definition. One is affordable rental and one is affordable purchase. So you're absolutely right, especially on the Moira Street, almost the entire building would become affordable in the rental, as rental if the rents are decreased. If they were to sell units, which again is not their intent, then the entire building would also be affordable on the ownership side of it. So the affordable housing crisis applies to both rental and purchase. And in this particular case, there's going to be increased affordable units on both the rental and the sale side of it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll go away, Ms. Sinclair. Yeah, Councillor Culhane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. If I could just ask, Andrea, summary and conclusions sheet with your signature, item number 5, if units were to be sold, all of the units would be considered to have a selling price below the ownership affordability threshold, and therefore would be considered affordable. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Does it presume that if you're in the unit, you can afford to buy it? Because that's how it reads to me.
So what that means is when you look at the provincial policy statement of affordability, on ownership, it's based on a percentage of your income. So we looked at what the average income is in Belleville and then took percentage on the most conservative price, and it came up at about $300,000, give or take, is anything under that price is considered an affordable purchase price in Belleville. Now, they don't break that down in terms of type, so it could be a semi, it could be a town, it's just anything under 300,000 is considered affordable in Belleville. Now, that's not to say that if these units were ever sold, they'd be 300,000, they'd be significantly lower than that, but all that really means is if it was their intent to sell the units, all of the units would be below that affordable price, or would be considered affordable ownership.
At 300,000.
Yeah, it's not the exact number, but it's around that amount.
Close enough. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Brown?
Through you, sorry.
Oh,
might just stay for a sec. In the description related to Bridge Street, it was very clear that the population there is much more in the senior age group. In 230 and 232, is it the same, or would we see greater diversification in terms of family, age of families, children, that type of thing?
I'm not sure of the existing tenants, to be honest, in Moira, but there's no, you obviously can't zone by type, so anyone could live in there. I do know Bridge Street is predominantly seniors, and I can get that information before the next meeting, but I'm not sure the exact breakdown of Moira. I know that in general it is less, it's, rental rates are lower, and I think there's a greater range in unit sizes, but again, I'd have to get that exact information on the breakdown.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Sanderson.
Yeah, through the chair, just to make note that the same comments I had on referral 6.1 also apply to 6.2. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. And no more further comments. All in favor? Motion's carried. And while I got a second, just remind committee members that during the public portion, when we have folks come to the podium, that would be the time to ask questions. Anyway, moving on to 7.1 reports, recommendation report, proposed zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw 10-245, 250 Sydney Street, City of Belleville, file number B-77-1076. Applicant owner is 2589989 Ontario Inc. Agent is RFA Planning Consultant Incorporated. Principal Planners Report number PP-2019-49. Resolution reads that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends the following to City Council: that zoning bylaw number 10-245 as amended be amended by rezoning the subject lands described as 250 Sydney Street to add cannabis processing facility as a permitted use to the restricted industrial M1-11 zone, with special provisions to recognize the existing 15-meter front yard setback, and that a bylaw to approve and authorize the execution of a development agreement between 2589989 Ontario Inc. and the Corporation of the City of Belleville be prepared for Council's consideration. Moved by Councillor Culhane, seconded by Councillor Williams. Any questions or comments? Councillor Culhane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I just wanted to comment that the residents were very concerned about changes in lighting and changes in fencing, and that I've been in contact with planning several times today, and I wanted to reassure them that the current lighting and fencing will remain, if I understood everything correctly, that there aren't any big proposed changes that they need to be concerned about. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Colleen. The intent is to leave the fencing as is. It's been confirmed that it satisfies the Health Canada requirements. And the lighting is a more of a flexible thing. The operator of the business has the choice on how they choose to implement security on their site, and so they're not proposing any changing to the lighting.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I just have one. Health Canada came out with a press release in May 8th, and basically they changed the process. So rather than, the way it works now is that you have to get the building up to their standards, get approvals here before proceeding with the Health Canada license versus the other way where, so does this fall into the new Health Canada process? I know this isn't necessarily a planning question, but it kind of does, because this has to prepare them for the Health Canada, which are a very rigorous application process.
Yeah, I think, it's an evolving industry, so things are changing all the time. But I think the key issue is that Health Canada regulations are so stringent on these that anything that we would likely ask for in terms of mitigation would be far exceeded by the Health Canada regulations that these businesses have to operate under. So.
Okay, great, thank you. All in favor? Motion's carried. 7.2, recommendation report, revised applications for zoning amendment, plan of subdivision, plan of common elements, condominium, 427 Farnham Road, City of Belleville, file number B-77-1079 and 12 CD-19001. Owner is Heritage Park JV. Agent applicant is RFA Planning Consultant Incorporated. Manager Policy Planning, Manager of Approvals Report number PP-219-46. Resolution reads that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends the following to City Council. That zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended be amended by rezoning the subject lands described as 427 Farnham Road from rural residential zone to low-density residential type 2 R2 with special provisions to permit a 10-unit semi-detached common elements condominium development. That approval of a draft plan of subdivision as shown on attachment 14 to the manager of planning, policy planning and manager of approvals report number PP-2019-46 be finalized for those lands described in attachment 13, file number 12 CD-19001, subject to the draft plan conditions outlined in attachment 15 of same. That approval and a draft plan of common elements condominium as shown on attachment 16 to the manager of policy planning and manager of approvals report number PP-2019-46 be finalized for the lands described in attachment 13, file 12 CD-19001, subject to the draft plan conditions outlined in attachment 17 of same. Got that? Moved by Councillor Culhane, moved by Mr. Baltutis. Any questions or comments? Councillor Culhane, your mic is
Already got my mic on. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure everyone's put a great deal of thought into this. It's a weighty matter with a great deal of information behind it. I go back to basic values of planning, health, safety, welfare. I cannot find a comparator for this roundabout. It shows 4 points of access, but one of them is a cul-de-sac. Every other roundabout I've looked at is 4 main road access. Plus, this roundabout exits up a hill, and I cannot find a comparator anywhere that does that. I'm not comfortable that we're meeting the health, safety, welfare, basic values of planning with this project, and I can't support it.
Are there questions or comments? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. So the policy, or sorry, the provincial policy statement and the official plan provide a framework by which planning requests can be assessed, evaluated, and decisions made. So it is not the intention of either the provincial policy statement or the official plan to trump common sense and logic. So if this strip of land were located anywhere else in the city, it would get a swift green light, but it isn't. It's proposed to be adjacent to the city's first major roundabout, and given the location and configuration, any development of this strip of land needs to consider the impact on the city and its residents. As the report states, no two roundabouts are alike, but the 3 examples provided bear no resemblance to this proposed development. They are not similar, let alone alike. The roundabout is limited in traffic flow with 2 main arterial feeders. That's Farnham and Maitland. And Moirley Court is a dead-end residential roadway. The distance traveled to Canifton from the roundabout is a short piece of roadway that crosses the river on a 2-lane roadway. So it is unique. As you consider all of the information, I would suggest that the roundabout is a one-of-a-kind in Ontario, if not all of Canada, and should not become a lab experiment for how close you can shoehorn in a residential development next to collector roads and a roundabout. So engineering studies aside, common sense and logic, and taking into account what's best for the city and its residents, I cannot support this development, and I would urge my colleagues around the table to deny this application. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I have one. I'll have staff refer to page 171 in our agenda. We've seen a lot of diagrams with the plan, and then also in conjunction with Farnham Road. And I want to refer to the environmental assessment report that was done by BT Engineering, because I believe they say in there the preferred route or the preferred plan would be to have road allowance for ultimately 4 lanes. And when I look at the diagram on, and I don't know if we can pull it up electronically. No, that's not the page. It was 171 in our agenda, but when I look at from the center of the road for the full road allowance, the actual line goes into the common elements.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so my concern is, and as a council, and I've seen this, where we deal with those legacy issues. We kind of scratch our heads as to why decisions were made a certain way, and we get shoehorned into, well, that was that decision, and then we've got to carry on from it. My biggest concern, and it's not in the next 5 years, even 10 years, because our comprehensive review is not calling for that growth, but to look at the 20-year build out of that area, there's considerable traffic that's going to be using Farnham Road. And ultimately, I can't see a local street coming off of Farnham Road across to Highway 62, as long as the province has control over that. So therefore, Farnham Road is going to be your main collector road, if you will, for the growth that's going to continue in that area. My concern is that if the engineering report, the EA assessment says that we should be allowing for the 4 lanes, and what's the width?
30 meters.
30 meters. So when I look at the one drawing here, has the 30 meters, it puts the 30-meter road allowance right through practically the middle of that common element driveway. And so if we ever need to, and I believe we should always be planning for the future and growth, maximum growth. So if we limit that because of the common element, then later planning committees, councils of the future are going to be dealt with the legacy of this decision. And so my concern is why would we not be planning for the full 30 meters now? And then what kind of impact does that have down the road?
Well, how long have you got tonight? The fact is, as staff, we try and take a balanced approach to dealing with issues of the current day, as well as looking at issues down the road. And for those around the table on council, you've seen numerous reports where we're trying to acquire property on Sydney Street and other properties, other areas of the city where we don't have enough road allowance width to be able to put in the proper infrastructure. In this particular case, the EA does identify that there is a potential in the future that Farnham Road may need to be widened to 4 lanes. I think on the balance of probabilities, based on the current urban boundary of the city and the development that ultimately will happen in that area, it's not likely that it will ever have to be 4 lanes. There is the possibility, and obviously urban boundaries can change going forward. And we, as we noted in the report, we've raised that issue with the applicant. And you're correct, the 30 meters would impact that common elements driveway. And the applicant has I guess, agreed on how to address that, and that they're prepared to put wording in the condominium agreement and bylaws that at such time in the future as we need that widening, that it will be given to the city, and they will have to modify their driveway to move it further to the east to accommodate that widening if and when it's required.
So, okay, and you know, I agree with the balanced approach, but my concern is when I look at what we had to go through to get the small sliver, to get the roundabout, and then when I look at, and I apologize for the committee, but I want to just make sure this point's well thought out here. My issue is, and I have no issues with the fact that they're suggesting they'll put a covenant there, we'll be able to go back. The difficulty is, though, that changes the complexion of the plan in comparison to what this committee has looked at several times. And so I think what we need to do is we need to see what it looks like, and it's there and I know everybody doesn't have the package from previous, but page 171 on our electronic agenda shows the line, and it goes right through, I've got it up here, right through the common element. And so moving the driveways is a suggestion then from staff that the common element road would just shift to the east, but everything stay equal? Your microphone.
There's sufficient room in front of the units with their own individual driveways to accommodate that shift to the east. And I think that's why the applicant is willing to agree to that provision within the agreement on it.
So I know that some of the concern was the fact of parking, and the applicant had said and stressed that the driveways would be large enough to keep vehicles off the common element driveway for snow removal, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I can't, my eyes aren't that good to see the diagram, but what's the current length of the driveway, and how much would the driveway be shortened because of the need to move the common element driveway sometime in the future due to our 30-meter road allowance?
I don't have the measurement of the current driveways. I'd say they're comparable, if not longer, than what you find in any of the subdivisions in the area right now. And the other thing to keep in mind, that common elements driveway is private property. In the proposal that's before the committee, the 10 owners of those units own that driveway, and they will manage that roadway as they see fit in terms of parking. And if they have a system that works for them, then that's effectively their business since it's their property. I think based on the design of the units and the intended market, I don't believe we're going to see a situation where you have 3-4 cars per unit. I think the garages and the driveways, even if shortened to accommodate the widening of the road in the future, will still be able to accommodate the parking that's required for those units.
Okay, so that was just my last question. Would it not be more reasonable then to have a plan before us that includes shifting everything as in final design? Because my concern is we're approving a moving target, but the reality is, I as a councillor, I want to protect that road allowance, because it's not just about now or 3 years from now, it's about 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And I want to make sure that the municipality has that control. And so it changes the dynamic. So those are, I guess, my questions and my comments on that particular application. But like I said, I think we really need to protect that road allowance. So, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Sanderson.
Just point of order. Do we take a recorded vote, or can we take a recorded vote?
Yes.
So I'd like to request a recorded vote.
Okay. While the clerk prepares for that, any other questions or comments? Councillor Williams.
Well, just on that point, I do agree with your comments, Councillor Carr. I do believe that we need to look at 10 year or 20 years down the road and not just a few years on that. And if this is the point we're bringing up, and I think it's a very valid one, that road has not been set, that we don't have that protected, the private road set, it needs to come back that's set. I think that's a good point that was brought up in the report, and I think that's something that was unfortunately, I think, talked about, but perhaps is just missing. So I think I would at this point, look to see that change before we can move forward with this project.
So that's a little different than what the motion on the floor is. You're just suggesting that if this is defeated, then they just bring in a different application?
I would like to see this changed if it's an amendment, but we can't make an amendment on that, so we just have, all we can do is defeat that, so.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Jennings?
I was pretty sure that was included in the report that I read, that they talked about the widening of the road and the driveways were long enough to accommodate that. Can we ask for somebody to speak to that?
Well, staff are able to access the documents. We've got more documents on this file here so it's just a matter of finding it.
Through the chair, the drawings show the driveways are about 12 meters in length currently, so that's approximately 40 feet. So they do have a good depth. Typical driveways in newer subdivisions are usually half that length. So, the conclusion from our development engineer was that the development could accommodate the widening of Farnham Road and the relocating of that access driveway.
Mr. Baltutis?
The city council, we paid, I guess, lots of money for our engineers to review this, third-party engineers to review this whole process, and they said it'll work. As my understanding is what I've read through all the reports, so I'm wondering why bother if in the future hiring consulting engineers if we're not going to follow a lot of their recommendations. I think we should follow it.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions or comments, Councillor Williams?
So just to staff, can we confirm then, I guess Appendix 10 was yelled out, but do we have on your side confidence that that road allowance will be followed to? And I think as Councillor Carr had brought up, that those driveways have enough space that once that allowance was moved, if we add and let's just pretend that we're going to have 4 lanes, that we're confident we have space, ample space coming out of that roundabout.
Yes, that's what our report is saying. That's what our development engineer has given an opinion on. And the owner has agreed to provide that provision for the future widening of the Farnham Road allowance into the development through the warning clause on title to the properties in the condominium agreement.
Okay, thank you. Just one more question, if I can. I know this wasn't brought up. We talked before also about sight lines, and I know that there was a new report that was done on the sight line from the property behind these units. Was there ever discussion on the decks that were coming off the second story, eliminating those and just being made a patio? Was that ever a discussion that was brought up from the developer?
Yeah, they're walkout units, right? So they're looking to build bungalows that have a walkout basement at the back, so the deck will be elevated. That was, in what you're referring to as the angular analysis that was done. I think that was brought up in discussions with the developer and his reps, and I don't believe they were willing to agree to just having an on-grade patio out the lower level of those units. They wanted to maintain the option of having the decks off the main floor of the units.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Through the chair, I think it was Councillor Williams that brought this up. For the future widening, the attachment number 10, what it shows is the future property line with that on there. And the reduction in the driveways themselves is down to about 10 meters, some of them. So there's still ample room there for the parking. Now that's including the driveway as well in there. And for the lots, block 9 and 10, it wouldn't affect those driveways themselves. So, and those are the shortest ones there as well.
And just for comparison, sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may,
No,
follow up, just in comparison, what would a normal house in any of these subdivisions, what would be the length of the driveway?
Well, it's standard in the subdivisions in that area, front yard setback is 6 meters, which is about 20 feet.
So these will be after the road, it'll be 10 meters, is that what you're saying?
If the widening did go through, the driveways would be reduced from 12 meters to 10 meters, so there'd be a 2-meter reduction in the driveway length.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. So my earlier comments certainly don't call into question the provincial policy statement. They don't call into question the official plan. They don't call into question the engineering input. I made the point fairly clear that if this piece of land was anywhere else, that there would be no problems with this application, but it isn't. The roundabout was there first, and we're trying to shoehorn a development into a strip of land right beside this roundabout. There isn't a roundabout or a residential development anywhere in Ontario that resembles what we're considering. So for me, the whole purpose of the Planning Advisory Committee is to assess, evaluate, discuss, and decide. So the decision is ours to make. And I would suggest that the decision to move forward with this development, I just can't support it. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bove, if I could we add in the agreement, follow up on Councillor Williams' suggestion, rather than have a deck, because despite the elevations, there are some sightline issues, and I don't know, maybe I'm more concerned with my privacy versus others, but is it possible, I know there's a walkout basement, is it possible that it could be a landing versus a deck to stairs with, say, a more elaborate patio? Could we put that limitation on it so that way you don't have neighbors up on a high deck looking over a 6-foot fence that really doesn't add privacy unless you're next to the 6-foot fence and maybe I'm just off on my elevations a bit, but so that they can both enjoy their backyards, but you don't have kind of the offset view, if you will.
Yeah, certainly that, I mean, any restriction like that can be put in. I guess my concern would come from future enforcement of it. A lot of decks get modified and a lot of decks get built that the city has no knowledge of. And, 5 years after, if this project does move forward 5 years down the road, somebody modifies that landing to be able to put a table and chairs out there. Are we going to be able to enforce it? I'd have a real concern that we wouldn't be able to do much about that, so it may create an issue that way.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Joyce.
But further to Mr. Wove's comment, is it not the understanding that each of the properties would have a mature tree in each sight line to help with some of the concerns that you have, obviously? And that's something you can manage because that's part of the development agreement going in.
Yes, the developer is proposing trees behind. Trees do assist in providing some buffering. Obviously, as the chair mentioned, the fence only provides some mitigation to a certain level, and having trees grow up above that fence is usually a good mitigation measure. The challenge is trees don't grow overnight. They take a while to mature. So as time goes by, those trees will provide some good screening, but they do take time to grow up.
Okay. Ms. Brown?
Probably a question more so than a comment, but this particular piece of property has been fraught with controversy from the day that it began. And I know and am aware that there have been several iterations of these plans, whether they come to PAC or not. I know that there have been variations. I do want to acknowledge that with all of the public feedback and the number of studies and number of engineering reviews that have been done, that in every case, the developer has tried to accommodate by adjusting his plans. I'm not supportive of the developer. I understand where the residents are coming from. But I think sooner or later, we have to make a call. We are either going to allow this piece of property to be developed or not. It's gone from apartment buildings to multiple units to 13 units to 10. And we study it and we study it and we study it. I think we have to make a decision. Are we going to allow development on this piece of property, yes or no? And so my question would be, if we as Planning Advisory and City Council defeat this particular proposal, will the developer be permitted to keep coming back with more and more plans?
Mr. Bowie?
Well, the planning system in Ontario allows everyone the right to develop their property, and there's a process that they have to go through if they need any type of planning approval from the municipality. So the developer is intent on developing the property. So I think the changes to the proposal have been the result of the planning process, so it worked the way it's intended to. And sometimes that means we go around in circles a bit, dealing with different applications. You know, if council chooses not to support the application, the developer has some options. He can appeal that decision to the local planning appeal tribunal. He can come back with another application and propose commercial development on it, which is recognized in the official plan. From staff's point of view, we think the residential use is much more consistent and impactful, less impactful to the abutting residential areas than a commercial development would be. And it's our position that this is a good proposal for the site, given the surrounding uses.
Good. Councillor Sanderson?
Through the chair to Director Bove. So what does the current zoning on that piece of land allow the owner or developer to do today?
So the property is, as I recall, the property is designated for commercial use in the official plan, which is the key guiding principle that the municipality has to follow. The zoning on it, I believe, is a D zone, which is in effect a holding zone, and that was a standard zoning that the Township of Thurlow used to place on properties that they weren't sure what ultimately may go on it, and that would be decided based on how a property owner decided to proceed in the future. So there would be a requirement to rezone the property to accommodate whatever proposal is put forward, much like we're talking about tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. No more questions or comments, so I'll turn it over to the clerk. Call the vote.
Councillor Sanderson?
No.
Mr. Baltutis? Councillor Williams?
Yes.
Councillor Culhane?
No.
Mr. Jennings?
Yes.
Mrs. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Joyce?
Yes.
Councillor Carr?
No.
Motion carries.
7.3, recommendation report for proposed zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw 3014, 1437 and 1455 Mudcat Road, City of Belleville, file number B-77-1085. Applicant is Clint Hamilton, owner is Robert Rollins, principal planners report number PP-2019-47. Resolution reads that Planning Advisory Committee recommends the following to City Council: that zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended be amended by rezoning the severed parcel described as 1455 Mudcat Road, Prime Agricultural PA Zone and Rural RU Zone to Prime Agricultural PA-56 Zone with special provisions to prohibit future severances, and the retained parcel described as 1437 Mudcat Road from Prime Agricultural PA Zone to Rural Residential RR Zone as a condition of consent for application B18-19. Moved by Councillor Sandison, seconded by Ms. Brown. Any questions or comments? See none, all in favor. Motion's carried. Information matters, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment monitoring report to July 2nd, 2019. Can I get a motion to receive? Mr. Baltutis, Councillor Culhane, any questions or comments? See none, all in favor. Motion's carried. General business and inquiries. I have one, and I kind of gave Director Bove a heads up. I had a member of the public contact actually myself and Councillor Sandison asking about a bylaw for paved driveways. Sometimes the subdivisions have covenants, and so it was a matter of, I guess, enforceability. Has the municipality ever considered having that type of requirement? Does it exist in other municipalities? If I can get a couple comments.
I don't believe the city has ever looked at that issue. I think historically, whether in a new subdivision or otherwise, it's always been left up to the homeowner to determine how best they want their driveway surfaced, whether that's gravel, concrete, asphalt, paving stones, any number of different options. It has not been an issue other than we require it to have a gravel surface as a minimum as opposed to a front lawn. I'm not aware of what is standard in other municipalities. I suspect many may have requirements for paving that apply to new subdivisions. Certainly in Belleville, it's fairly standard in new subdivisions for there to be a private covenant to require the driveway to be paved within a period of time, a year or two, depending on the subdivision. I am aware there's a couple instances where there's some disputes between homeowners and their builder with different issues, and the homeowner is refusing to pave their driveway. I think there's one just down the street from Councillor Sandison. I'm not sure if that's been resolved yet. There has been the odd one, but I'm not aware of too many issues like that around. I certainly haven't been made aware of them. It's important to note the city does not enforce private covenants. That's a civil matter between property owners. They would have to enforce that themselves. But certainly, if the committee wishes, we can take a look at what other municipalities do and bring a report back to the committee.
Okay, so let's get a motion for that. Moved by Councillor Sandison, seconded by Mr. Jennings, just for a staff report for information purposes. Any questions on that? All in favor? Motion's carried. Anything else under general business? Seeing none, I got some closing remarks. Planning Advisory Committee's applicable decisions will be forwarded to the City Council for consideration, forming part of the agenda for the City Council meeting to be held. I need a motion to adjourn. Mr. Baltutis, Councillor Sandison, all in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you.